In the Images of the Universe videos, we warn of the risks of considering light waves to be continuous. This is due to the quantized nature of light, addressed by Einstein in his theory of the photoelectric effect, and by Planck in his experiments with electromagnetic oscillators. It is true that when it comes to cosmic radiation, called background, the illusion of continuity of light waves is such that the delayed effect has become part of our physical reality. The sum of the ridges and valleys, which give us the illusion of the continuity of the waves, is dependent on time. Without time there would be no movement, and the waves would lose their meaning. Something similar happens with our memory. Without time it could not work, and events could not be remembered. Thus, the continuity of the light waves would depend on our point of view. Since, in order to act, our memory would depend on time and the constant presence of the information contained in the light, the photon packaging phase disappears from our physical reality, as it does not demand time. Both Geiger, 1925. Even so, quantization suggests the discontinuous nature of light. It is very difficult for us to conceive of the possibility that our conscience could be acting discontinuously. The classic wave theory works with the premise that light waves would propagate in a vacuum in the form of continuous waves. If this were real, it would be as much if the radiation emitted in the Big Bang was coming from our past or leaving the present towards that source, then placed in our future. This question would be one of the consequences of the relativity of time. As it is a matter of defining our points of view, opting for one of the alternatives, I do not see why one should criticize the current position of astronomers, but it is worth a warning. The concept of continuous waves can be evidenced in Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time. In a diagram on page 49 of the Brazilian edition, the Sun and the star Alpha of the Centaur are placed on the same spatial plane, which symbolizes the present moment. The distance between the aforementioned stars is measured in kilometers. Vertical is the timeline, subdivided into years. A ray of light would draw a diagonal line, taking 4 years to reach Alpha Centaur. The evaluation of time depends on considering light waves as if they were continuous. Using the limited speed of light to evaluate time and distances may even be acceptable in theory. But, taking into account the discontinuity of electromagnetic waves, suggested by the quantization of light, the procedure would be a form of abstraction and extrapolation of concepts that would not have scientific support. On the same page 49, Stephen Hawking tries to demonstrate scientific thinking about the concept of the future light cone of any massive event. I will quote the text from the Brazilian version of the book in its entirety due to its importance. If a pulse of light is emitted at a certain time from a certain point in space, then, as time passes, it will spread like a sphere of light whose size and position are independent of the thought speed. The light will behave like the ripples that spread on the surface of a tank when a stone is thrown at it. If we think about the traditional model of the tank and the one dimension of time, the expanding circular undulations will draw a cone, the tip of which is in the place and in the time when the stone reached the water. This cone is called the future light cone of the event, which is the set of events from which a pulse of light is able to reach a given event. Citing the example of the hypothetical death of the sun, Hawking tells us that if the sun stopped shining at this very moment, it would not affect things on Earth at the present time, because they would be external to the event when the sun went out. We would only be aware of the fact 8 minutes later, which is the time it takes the sunlight to reach us. Hawking's statement justifies St. Augustine's thought that any event that was taking place in our future, as would be the case with the death of the sun, would not exist in practice, because it would not have happened yet. With that, the 0 point of time would be moved virtually from the position of the sun to our position on Earth, justifying our instantaneous observation of events. It would also justify Newton's thought that gravity would act instantly and at a distance. That is, even if the sun had gone out 8 minutes ago, for us, the darkness would manifest instantly. At this moment, the observer's point of view becomes relevant, because if the time counting started from his position, and not from the position of the stars, the time would no longer exist outside his consciousness, becoming relative. If the observer could be in the position of the sun, Alpha Centauri would be spotted 4 years late. For the reciprocal to be true, we would have to count on the presence of another observer in the position of Alpha. So, no matter how long the sunlight would have taken to travel in the vacuum before reaching us on Earth, the detail would tell us that the light would not move at all in a vacuum, or that it would have ubiquitous characteristics. That is, the light would be simultaneously everywhere in the two-dimensional space until it spread. It is seen that the ubiquity of light and cosmic radiation as a whole would be, in principle, a condition supported only by our point of view. Hence it would be important that science, when preparing its theses, did not neglect the influence of the isolated observer. It is that our conscience is being supported by our memory and the continuous flow of time. These would not be conditions that could be observed in our future, as it has not yet happened. They would already be part of our past. In this regard, on page 200 of the book cited, Hawking makes the following outburst. Where does this difference between the past and the future come from? Why do we remember the past and not the future? As you can see, the concept of the future-like cone of any massive event would result from an extrapolation of concepts. This is due to the realization that what was in our future could not be directly measured. Not even the speed of light or the existence of waves. They would be the result of a form of remote tracking of information, a condition that only becomes possible when we dive into our past. To project our cone of light from the past towards our future is to build a house of cards, which can collapse at any moment. This misinterpretation would be the direct result of the concept of continuous waves in classical physics. From here we will analyze, in detail, the variables that would participate in the formation of the future-like cone, and see the result. The three fundamental variables are the space, the time, the light, encompassing all forms of electromagnetic radiation. As can be seen in the example of the death of the sun cited by Stephen Hawking, time could not be measured directly in our future. That is, we would have to wait for 8 minutes to find out about the event. In the case of the sudden death of Beta Andromeda, the star would shine in the night sky for 75 years. Let us, therefore, remove the time variable from the construction of our house of cards. Without time, our cone would not have measurable depth, as can be seen in the graph. The house of cards would collapse on itself and on the two dimensions of space. Even so, in the case of the universe, time, when contracting, would not be allowed to reach absolute zero. Space could not become completely flat, because we need to preserve the uncertainty of the position of the light source, even if it is at the subatomic level of matter.